Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by the one and only Dr. Karl Pagenkemper.
Hello.
It's always a pleasure to have you on here, sir, as well as Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
Everybody was kung fu fighting.
Oh, were they? Okay.
Wow.
That's the rumor on the
Were
street.
Were they?
I don't know if they were, but I mean,
We should have an episode about that.
yeah, we'll have to find out. I mean, it's Karl karaoke day, so you have to finish the line that Alex started.
Is that what you're calling it these days? Karaoke?
Yeah. I sometimes we get things wrong.
Yeah, I
sometimes
know.
we don't do things
Absolutely.
right, and then we grow and we progress. And that's a reference to last week's
Someone
episode.
mentioned that in an email that they also pronounced karaoke wrong.
Yeah.
So they were
Karaoke was how I
Yeah.
used to pronounce it as a naive teenager. So
Russ did. Yeah, Russ emailed us again this week and said he did it. So you guys are in the pronounce it wrong club.
yeah, hey, you know what happens when you just read a word and you never hear it? You're bound to pronounce it
So
wrong.
many songs
It's also
like
hard
that.
to spell.
And-
There's so many things with the word.
Well, and you didn't
I
have
understand.
like Google Pronounce or anything like that, where you
No.
could just
Could
go
we
and like,
Google
how do
anything?
you pronounce this thing? What does it sound like?
Now we know.
But anyways, I have a more pressing question that I'd like to ask everyone. It's a question that helps me gauge someone like, how are we going to get along? What's our relationship going to be like? And that question is, I'm going to start with Karl, since he's our guest, and then Jess and Alex, you guys can answer.
Thank you.
Do you believe in aliens?
You mean like from Haiti or something like that?
No,
or?
not like extraterrestrials.
The extraterrestrials.
Yeah.
I have no reason to think there couldn't be.
Okay.
And,
I like that answer.
I'm coming in from a theological perspective. I think the odds are not high.
Okay.
But is it possible? Why not? Mm-hmm. Depending on how your worldview stems from our understanding of human-centric universe. So I'm open.
Okay.
And then the next question is, do we owe them the gospel? But sorry, that's...
Yeah, do we?
I don't know the answer to that question, but it's sure fun to speculate. Yeah, C.S. Lewis used to speculate. I don't know, why couldn't we?
Yeah, I like to think they might come with their own gospel they're trying to sell us on. Jess, do you believe
Wow.
in aliens?
I think that Karl's pretty dead on, but I will say that anything like aliens, like even it makes me think of in the realm of like Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot. I love all that stuff. I used to listen to Art Bell, Coast to Coast AM.
Oh my gosh. I love Art
Back
Bell.
in the day.
I listened to that too.
I love Independence Day.
Not so much anymore.
I think aliens are entertaining.
I thought the movie Alien
The movie
was
Aliens
one of the
are entertaining.
finest.
So I'm not going to say no. I'm not going to say yes, but I enjoy it.
Alex?
I think I would entertain that they could be there. I'm highly, highly unlikely on the aliens because I do think there's a lot of, if we get into Area 51, things like that, I'm like, yeah, I don't probably think that was extraterrestrial. But I
There's
would
a lot
say
of
that
people
there's
that would
definitely
disagree.
a possibility. I know
Yeah.
I know there's people
remember
that
the
disagree.
people that were going to run?
Yeah, people can disagree with me.
Did you
That's
sign up
fine.
for that?
So I don't think that specifically maybe that is alien takeover, but I would say that
Yeah.
it's possible.
Okay.
It's not probable,
we're all-
but possible.
Everybody, yeah.
What about you,
So what-
Eric?
Yeah, I think, I don't know. I guess on the likelihood of it, I struggle with that because I feel like we keep discovering more and more of the universe and the expanse of it. And so that's, what's the word that I'm looking for?
Infinity? Infinitude?
Infinitude. There we go. That's the word. That
It's
will work.
big.
It's big. It just keeps going and we keep finding more. So it's like, I feel like because of that, the likelihood kind of goes up in my mind just because it's like, we don't really know what could be out there, but I don't know.
Throw in a metaverse and shoot it could be most likely. But
Yeah.
who would ever know how to establish the existence of a metaverse?
And then you get into life. Is an alien simply life on
Yeah.
another planet, or like what has
What
to
constitutes?
You're looking for
Yeah.
intelligent
they
life.
have conscient, like what equals that? So
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is it
Thank
an
you,
animal?
Jess.
So the question for me now that I have for you is, would we be your friends?
What?
Based on how
Did we
we answered the
pass?
question, like,
yeah,
would we
no.
pass
I
or
think-
would we be in or kind of like outer circle?
I think being open to the idea of it potentially. I think that's a safe bet to have because I mean I've brought it up to some people and they're just like, no, that's silly, and it's like, okay, well, that's no fun.
It's fun to talk about.
Yeah. Anyways,
Yeah.
I'm glad
Curious what
I'm
other
glad we
people
can all be
think.
friends.
Aliens out there in the universe that are just smart enough not to come to us.
Yeah, they've listened to the transmissions. There's nothing
They've been
here.
watching us for.
But if you are listening and you are an alien and you would like to come on the Uncomfortable podcast,
We'd be happy to have you.
we would love to have you.
Stop on by.
Yeah, I hear they love, Leave It to Beaver, but that's kind of where it ends. All right, well, that answers that question. Up next, we got headlines. Our first headline comes from IndieWire.com. It says Disney responds to Peter Dinklage's criticisms over Snow White. We're taking a different approach. Dinklage is quoted as saying, "Have I done nothing to advance the cause from my soapbox? I guess I'm not loud enough," said this actor. If you're not familiar with Peter Dinklage, I think probably made his claim to fame in Game of Thrones, but
Yeah, he's an
he's
elf.
also an elf. That was probably one of his earlier roles. I think he's in a new movie called Cyrano.
He was in a Thor movie, wasn't he?
Oh yeah, I think he was Ragnarok.
So I'm maybe out of it, but I do
Yeah,
remember
that's
that.
right. He was in there. So I mean, pretty much, this is him saying, "All right, Disney was kind of, saying, hey, look how progressive we're being. We're casting a Latina actress as Snow White, and to from his perspective, who is someone who has dwarfism, he's saying, well, yeah, okay, but you're still kind of relying on this trope of these 7 dwarves living in a cave or whatever." And it sounds like Disney has responded by saying that there was a statement from the Walt Disney Company that said,
We're taking a different approach.
yeah, well, it says Snow White remake we're taking it in a different direction to avoid referencing stereotypes from the original animated film. We're taking a different approach with these 7 characters, and we've been consulting with members of the dwarfism community. So, I think I don't know. This story kind of hits close to home for me. My brother-in-law has dwarfism, and it's one of those things where it feels sometimes. I mean, like, I know it's not the last bastion of prejudice, but it definitely feels like one of the final ones that you just isn't really talked about.
Yeah.
Even down to like the I won't say it, but I'll call it the M word. Like that's incredibly derogatory to a little person, and so it's just one of those things that it's just not talked about. It's not, people don't really consider it, and I think so. Having a direct family connection, I was even talking to my wife about this story, and it's like that. I don't think if I would have had that connection, I would have been able to maybe process what he's trying to say as well. But.
And I think it's got to be difficult too, because he is the only voice. So it's got to be frustrating for him saying, like, I'm on my soapbox saying this. He's kind of solo going up against Disney and this progressiveness of changing something. So I think it's important that we listen and kind of take a second look, because he said in the article, which I thought was good, and we try to do a lot of things, like we try to progress past something that maybe isn't the best or could be better, but we're still looking back and what are we bringing along into this new thing. And so it's important.
And I think it's also important to note that he mentions that he doesn't, like, he's not saying get rid of Snow White, like that story, because I think he does see the evolution of culture, and so he's like, he doesn't want that to be hidden. He just wants, like, hey, if you're going to address this, if you're going to redo this, then let's address some of the different nuances as culture has grown and things like that. So sometimes people jump on like cancel culture. I don't remember who it was this week that said if they didn't take Joe Rogan off of Spotify. They're leaving. Some musician said that. And so it's not quite cancel culture, I wouldn't say. That he's saying, Disney, you need to remove this, otherwise we're going to pick it, that kind of thing. But he's saying, hey, if you've got a chance to redo it and knowing what we've learned, then why not talk about that a little bit more? So,
Yeah.
Well, anytime you can undermine former stereotypes, or at least call them into question. I mean, Disney has a history of forming a lot of our culture.
Yeah.
And usually being a few generations behind. And this, if I'm reading the article correctly, does feel a little behind. But we have a culture that's dragging its feet on this stuff. So, I have a sister who's cerebral palsic. She's aware of it. I'm aware of her, but I'm not aware of her cerebral palsy. It never leaves my head. So differently abled people, which is now the popular language, and it's helpful.
Yeah.
So I really am not following Disney a whole lot. Don't watch a lot of Disney anymore. I used to, but as a kid, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
Is it sets a lot of our cultural agenda.
Well, and it's one of those things where they've gone back and remade several of their original animated films into live action films, and so this is kind of following in that,
kind of the next one
in those footsteps. But I mean, if you look at the history of Hollywood and the way it has treated people with dwarfism as almost props in so many of its films, whether it's Oompa Loompas or whatever. I mean, they're always just, here are these little people
They're
that
not
we're going to
the heroes.
I mean, it's just kind of been for at least 100 years, it's just, that's the way it is. And I think Dinklage has made a place where, he, at least in something like Game of Thrones or something like that, he's kind of positioned himself as he has the chops to be a lead actor in something, and it's not just this novel thing that you put in there for comic relief or something
well
like
said,
that.
Eric.
Yeah. So, anyways, let's go on to our next headline. Our next headline comes from relevantmagazine.com. It says Lecrae lost a tour date after criticizing gentrified politicized churches. This is a tweet that went out on January 19th, I believe. It said, once upon a time, I thought I was done with Christianity. But the reality was I was just done with the institutional, corporatized, gentrified, politicized, culturally exclusive version of it. Following that up, he quoted that tweet by saying, just lost a show because of this tweet. Point proven. Facepalm emoji. Now, who this venue was never came to light. It sounds like in that wherever that concert was going to be held in that city, they found him a new venue, or someone else stepped up for that, which isn't surprising at all. But I think as we head into our topic here in a little bit about faith deconstruction, I think this is another one of those things where this is the things that he is pointing out are definitely hot button issues that lead to people deconstructing.
Yeah, and I mean Lecrae, he's kind of always made Christians mad because he doesn't he's not like, I am exclusively a Christian artist, He's not like trying to perform just to be on K-Love or whatever. He's said, hey, I'm an artist who is Christian, and he's tried to, I think, promote the gospel with his albums, try to bring other rappers along, Andy Mineo, other people through the production studio, 116 kind of community that he has. And so, but he's kind of been a target for those who probably want to say that there's a slide towards progressivism or things like that he's like, Charlie Kirk is like, no Christian church should ever platform this guy and things like that, which I'm just like, that's kind of silly, because I've listened to some of his songs that have really challenged me, honestly, even in my thinking and my postures about things and helping understand another point of view. I mean, the Welcome to America and even that whole album that was on there's some powerful truths in that. I can see how people would be pretty offended if so I'm going to stop.
I get a little annoyed, to be honest with you, with Charlie Kirk and some of the things I would say about him. I don't think you'd have me back. But I do get...
Censor.
It's just censor me off there. I do have a little concern because he has a huge platform and the deplatforming of other people is, I find it ultimately kind of rude on people who are searching their way through the Christian world. And you want to go say, you can't do that, you're out of here. And if it's straight consumerism, which is what Christianity reflects a lot today, then you know what, we won't consume. And I'm sorry, and Lecrae is just, he's going to have to get over it. But a bigger cultural issue of how we deplatform people like that, it's unbelievable. And Charlie Kirk has put himself in a particular lane in Twitter and Facebook and a bunch of things, and books that he's written that defining how to, you should be more careful when you write and know more about what you're talking about when you write and speak.
Well, I mean, I would assume he is in a position to speak out against cancel culture, and what he is in return doing is perpetuating cancel culture. Right. Within the own
cancel culture comes from both ends. And the guys who are trying to explore their world and make sense of it usually get hit the most. Yeah. And it does happen from left and right. Right seems to be a little more vitriolic about it. Left has it. They got their own fundamentalism. So
yeah, I mean, Christians, we kind of had the corner market on cancel culture before it was even called cancel culture, though. Like early on, like we would boycott anything that came across the radar. That might be whatever, boycott McDonald's for this, boycott Target for that. So I mean,
don't go to Disney World because
so.
And denominations have come out and say don't go to Disney World because they support this in the LGBT community. And local pastor says, I'm going there next week. That sounds like fun. And so they don't know how seriously to take this. And the result is we all look kind of clownish at times,
wiping the egg off our face.
Yeah, and it's so easy to begin to, even just because Charlie Kirk's mentioned in there, that's not the thrust of it, but to politicize even something like that. And I don't even think that's what Lecrae's going for. Lecrae has been a person that's like, he cares about politics, but he's never really trying to press into politics or bash, even in the fact that he's not highlighting. He could do some damage if he wanted, I think, to probably call out whomever this is that did, remove his show or cancel him. But I think so far from what I see, he's taking the high road of it and saying, hey, this happened. I'm proving the point, but I'm not going to prove the point so far that I'm going to, take other people out or highlight, maybe make them more famous than they would have been. Who knows who that venue is? And it does sound like people are been gracious enough to step into it.
Always beware of the artists because they're constantly pushing the edges of things because they're exploring and it scares. That's why they're the number one people to die when a fascist system takes over. They're the ones that are exploring and challenging. Frankly, I think we ought to welcome the challenge.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean we have to adopt it. But I think as believers, if we're afraid of that, cut me a break.
Yeah. All right.
So I won't be back next time, is what you're saying.
No,
we always want you here, Karl.
You're always welcome, Karl. Yeah, that does it for headlines. Up next, we're going to be heading into not uncharted territory. This is something we don't do very often, but we're taking a stab at an episode we did way back in 2019, episode number 6, Faith Deconstruction. Here we come. Faith Deconstruction 2.0, part 2, I don't know what you want to call this again. But according to our YouTube comments, by the way, this is probably out of all the uncomfortable podcast episodes on YouTube, this is probably our number 1 most viewed, I think. Or is it number 2?
I think it's number 1.
Yeah.
Definitely most commented.
Almost 10,000 views, I think. Lots of comments, over 100 comments on it. And I think that's how we're going to actually start this off, because we are addressing a previous episode. We're going to read some of the comments that we have.
This is long before Jess.
Before Jess.
Karl.
I don't think Karl was on, though. This was the early days, back in 2019.
August 2019.
Yeah, almost.
He got hired back then, I think.
2.5 years ago, yeah. I I have some fun. Like I have 3 like little short ones that are just kind of somewhat either rude, amusing, or just completely. I don't even know the context of them, but I thought I'd read these comments just because they're there and they make me chuckle. The first one is, and this is in response to our episode 6. Will millennials think and talk like teens till they die?
Yes. Sorry.
That's mean, Carl.
Carl, I'm assuming
Carl was once a
I'm
millennial,
assuming
and he's
Carl has
sticking with it.
Do you have a fake account called the Pneumatic Tube on YouTube?
No, but I should.
Yeah, I don't know.
I would probably,
looks
if I put a
suspicious.
fake, I'd flip a gender and try something else.
Oh, okay.
But
All right.
Ooh, you would go straight catfishing.
absolutely.
This comment by Steve. I'm not.
I don't think you'd go straight catfishing. Let me just interject right now. I don't think that's what he would do.
He could be catfishing us.
But I understand the sentiment of what you were trying to suggest, Jess. So I just
Thank
want to
you.
clear your
That's it.
name, Carl.
My name is Mud anyway.
Oh. All right. This one's by Steve, and I have no idea. Maybe someone can help me out
Allegedly.
understand what he's saying here. Women need men to love. That's how women survive.
Women need men to love. That's how
Let
women
it
survive.
go. Just let it go.
Let it go. Okay, I can't sing it
I
here.
almost used words that I shouldn't.
Yeah, don't use that word.
Yeah.
I don't know,
I feel like
Steve.
I do a pretty good job surviving.
Yeah. Okay. There we go. Thanks.
Shut that down.
Thanks, Jess. Appreciate that. Heard it here, Steve. Ken says the 3 people after the main host nailed it for me. So,
Whoa.
yeah, I messed up bad. Those
Way to
Alex
go.
and Mackenzie and Rachel, they all did a great job. James, who has a Beavis avatar, says I watched like 3 minutes and I feel dumber. So there you go.
Well, for James's defense, I think at that point, like our intro was 3 minutes long.
That's true.
I went back to listen to this episode. I'm like, man, our intro was way too long.
You had no headlines
Yeah.
back then.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's true. We cut it down.
The intro music, even at that point.
Yeah, we cut it down. Matthew says 10 minutes in and haven't heard anything yet. So, really,
Turn the volume up.
just some
Turn the
fun
volume up.
fun comments. Yeah, you're muted.
10 minutes and you weren't listening? Come on.
Wow.
I think we had some other more constructive comments as well that were actually helpful.
The thing is, I think this is a podcast due to YouTube that I think has gotten more traction actually lately, because when we had this conversation, really, deconstruction, there's so many more people that have authored this, so many more blogs, podcasts that have been talked about since this. And so a lot of our comments are even coming, which is partly why I wanted to at least have this conversation, as I've learned a lot about this. And also to have a chance to rebuttal to some comments that have come in even recently. So like 2 weeks ago, we have one that said from JP that says, respectfully, why would you guys spend an hour talking about something you essentially have no understanding of? They won't like every other show we do. Like a simple
speak for yourself.
Google search, I'm teasing. Simple Google search would have been adequate enough for you to have basic knowledge about it, but instead you just talked about what you think it is. I don't see the point of this video. Which I'm always curious, like, did you actually listen all the way through? Like, you should have stopped if you didn't see the point. Cassie, 3 months ago, I'm disappointed that you outright admitted that you do not know what the term meant and still wanted to give your opinion on it. There's a lot of us trying to find truth in the hurt of our lives, and this was not really helpful. Which, again, I think this was a comment from 3 months ago, and having that conversation 2.5 years ago, I've even had way more conversations with people talking about this, wrestling through these types of things. And so sincerely, part of, I think, the motivation to do this is because we don't want to hurt people. We want it to be a helpful conversation, and hopefully we're always learning and evolving in our understanding of some of these things as more people speak out, as we have more stories that people are talking about. And so hopefully it's a time for us to even deconstruct a little bit of that process and where we're at now. We have a different cast and things like that.
We're going to deconstruct the deconstruction, as it were.
Yeah, and I have a couple of, I mean, I don't know if I'll get to all these, but there's one I wanted to address from Kyle. It said, not not feeling the way the first guy explained his definition of deconstruction, calling it cherry picking. Pretty offensive. Deconstructing is about finding who God really is and not relying on how people tell you. Diving into what Scripture actually means, realizing that there is more than one interpretation of these vast, expansive, and beautiful texts, and wanting to know the true meaning behind them. It's about taking ownership of your own faith and not just believing because you've been told to. So, and that's the one thing. Like, one thing there, Kyle got exactly right. Is I gave a terrible definition of it. I was completely wrong, and I pretty much called it cherry picking. So yeah, my apologies on that one. I just want to fess up to that because that was 100% me not knowing what I was talking about in the moment. So
cherry picking is easy as a target because we all do it. Mm-hmm. I think the damage here is that anytime we talk about deconstruction, we're a little bit in the chronological snobbery, and which is a nice thing to say. It's easy to read 2 years back and say, boy, we were naive. We've been doing that for centuries.
Yeah.
And it drives all our cancel culture now. Look, we did the one we just dealt with because we're looking back 100 years or 75 years. So, yeah, this stuff was – deconstruction's been around since the time of Jacques Derrida, and I mean, this has been going on, and we've kind of co-opted a term that doesn't even fit. And now – I think it's fair to say we're in a culture where it's starting to grow again, and it's starting to grow rather rapidly. We are in a culture that's not very favorable towards faith. So, yeah, getting this right, it's worth going back and revisiting.
So how would you define deconstruction then? I mean, if you mentioned that the term isn't probably very accurate.
Well, it's you have philosophical notions that go on that have to do with the notion of texts and how they mean things in the real world. Now, that is a very hot button. But deconstruction for most of us is well, let's put it simply. We have accumulated a theological house in ourselves over time. We have seen and understood things. Could be from our initial faith. It could be from our church background. It could be from our parents. And somewhere along the line, some of those things didn't add up. And as those who believe in truth, when we see cracks in what we know, we have a tendency to be pretty much all intensive. It's all gone. I don't see that, can't work, it must all trash, and we'll burn the whole building down. And I think a lot of times, and this is the problem we often have with deconstruction, we find people who have struggles with things. It could be from trauma, and we can list all those things you like. But we discover it doesn't fit what we thought. It just doesn't fit, and we go through an angst, and we try to reconstruct, and that's the challenge: is are we backing away from something? Are we turning our back on something and going away? And so doubt is a common word. I remember hearing doubt showed up when I did a quick review, and doubt. My heavens, doubt is of the essence of faith. I don't change my mind without some doubt somewhere along the line. Mm-hmm. We often doubt things. It's the reason we adopt new positions. We doubt. I'm not sure that's the best way to handle that. So Christians are going to go through doubt, and deconstruction, we'll probably do it all of our lives to some degree. It's just a question of how destructive is it, and that's the problem. Deconstruction and destruction sound a lot alike. They don't have to be.
Yeah. And I think for me, I mean, even to what you were talking about with Kyle, like his definition is even different than a lot of like articles I've read and people explaining their deconstruction process. And I think that's difficult when you've got a cultural word that has a lot of different meanings to different people, because there isn't a this is not a word that you just go find in the Merriam-Webster dictionary and all of a sudden understand the philosophical meaning of it. And so as I was just looking for, some people's takes on what it is in a short kind of statement or sentiment, what I found that seemed like the most helpful and the most universal was the systematic pulling apart of a belief system you were raised in, to your point, Karl, at that house, and to determine what is still believable in light of everything else you know. And so pulling apart systematically the things that you were raised in, and you're trying to determine, okay, well, is this still believable? I've grown, even for us, in some ways. I joke that we were deconstructing it, but we know more. Man, the last 2.5 years have been wild politically with a worldwide pandemic. So we've moved so far since that episode that we know more, and so therefore we're even able to pull apart our own definitions and those conversations in light of everything else we know. And
I think why it is a hot button topic. It is kind of a triggering word because you can read a definition. It's just a bunch of words put on a page. But in between all those words, in between the lines is hurt. It's anger. It's maybe something that we feel like has wronged us. And in the middle of unpacking like logical facts, thoughts, religion, theology, we're also having to face like the hurt, the maybe trauma, the abuse, or something else that's been woven in there, whether it's directly related to that or just part of our life. And it's just it's mushed all together.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime you have an all or nothing format, and that's very common amongst certain segments of the evangelical community. By the way, you don't have to be a Christian or religious to be a very fundamentalist. You can blow things apart and people collapse. And so one of the problems is how much foundation does your faith actually have, and that house can be built on a few things and get a little bit wild. In some parts, we deconstruct whole. I'm about ready to do a little reconstruction in our master bath, and some of it's going to get torn to the studs, and some of it's just going to be painted. And it needs to be done, and I think we'll be happy when it's done. But right now, it's just not holding up. And some of our thinking about some of our theology, some of our understanding of the church, some of our understanding what Christ is and God is about, when they get pushed around, sometimes those cracks make everything crumble, but they don't have to. I want to argue that there is something true and good and beautiful fundamentally about the Christian religion, and I'm okay with the word religion, by the way, that is still viable and can handle the challenges and not afraid of it. Just not afraid of it. And it can be rebuilt. It can be reconstructed on a better foundation and something that actually looks more biblical. But our theologies and, different rooms in our house sometimes need completely renovated. Others just need to be sort of painted and touched up a little bit.
Yeah. And I think, and also just my reading about it, there seems to be more community forming around this, and not like its own religion, but of sorts, where it's becoming its own theology of some sorts, of people that have kind of left their traditional understanding of Christianity, and there's been this 6 pillars that have come across in several articles and some of the podcasts I was listening to about this, that seem to be 6 pillars that lead to deconstruction. And for some people, they only need 1 pillar to fall. For some, it's all 6. And so those are the Bible, so the canon, and that a lot of times it's like, oh, that couldn't have been right. It's ancient. Like just questions about the text, textual criticism. Another, which for a lot of people is eternal torment. So that the idea of hell and a loving God, and how could that be eternal? Penal substitutionary atonement, so that Jesus essentially it saves us from his Father and not saves us from hell or our sins. And so for some people, they're like, that doesn't make sense. Like logically, why would he do that? Just the suffering in the world. So for a lot of people, it's either immediate suffering happening in their lives and seeing the suffering happen in the world more than we probably have ever. Just end times hype, I think, for some people. I know you've even talked about this, Eric, in your own story of people didn't plan for your future because they thought there was going to be none. Jesus is coming, Y2K, all those things. And then lastly, and probably the most difficult for me to know and hear, because I probably contribute to this the most, is just the church, the people, how they act. Some of the stuff that Lecrae was talking about even in that tweet is, how people perceive the church, what it's against more than what it's for, and just the mess, the wake of pain and things. And so those seem to be the 6 pillars. Usually one of those someone interacts with that starts to send them down the litany of the others and start to deconstruct based off of those.
I think it's probably put in 2 kind of categories here. Most of these are intellectual and academic questions, and I think particularly the last one, how the church acts, that's a social one, and it makes it more personal. So As far back when I was living in Texas for a while, I had a couple who had been married by a guy who turned out to be a pastor, a good guy. Unfortunately, he was also a serial rapist and hit up for assault, which in his case was with a knife. And it blew them apart because so much of their faith of a person that they even trusted some of the beginning of their married life together was being blown apart while this guy was going to jail. I think a huge portion of it is just disappointment. Trauma, disappointment in people is what triggers it. I think we can give intellectual conversations about Bible. I'm not so sure we're ever going to end up without some problems. The discussion of hell, got it. The penal substitutionary atonement, come up with a better theory of atonement. There are several out there, so I don't worry about that too much. But how the church behaves almost always is what undermines or trauma. The other element may turn out to be suffering, because I think that's a really legitimate question. And does Christianity have a real answer for that, or is it just a fake answer? We can explain it away and say, well, God really does have a purpose and all that. But I think we need to lean into that one a little bit heavier sometimes, because the sheer quantity of evil. At times, the raw power of quantity of evil should give us pause. And those questions are, gosh, if Christians aren't asking those questions, we're just being naive. In a corner somewhere, we need to stick our head out once in a while.
Yeah.
And I think really it comes down to, is Christianity true? I mean, people are wrestling through, is this true?
Yep.
And is Christianity good? Like, when we look at the scheme of the world and how it affects the world, is it true and is it good? And and I think all of those can fall into one of those two kind of
categories. Does it have beauty to it, ultimately? Because I actually think that's why there's art, I think. But it's, yes, true, good is good. That's a good place to and all your six fall into that pretty much.
And then how do I fit into it? What does it mean for me? These are all facts or things that could happen, but then how does that apply to my life?
Sure. They can threaten our lives, threatens the stability of our lives. And like most emotions, they are like shorthand for many of us as to my well-being. Is my well-being upset? And it fractures, and then we go off on the trail.
I think we've talked about it a couple different times about how we've had episodes on dealing with doubt and things like that, and how, that it's important in our faith journey to have those moments of doubt and to address them and to talk about them. I think in certain circles that might be looked down upon, or ye of little faith kind of a comment would be made or something like that. And but I think so much of deconstruction, at least my understanding of it now, is kind of breaking apart the versions of God that we've built up in our minds, that were built primarily on the context of other people's beliefs. And I think that's because, if I look at my own life and the parts that I've had to deconstruct, which now that I am comfortable using that term because I understand it better, and that it is not cherry picking, again, I'll reiterate that, but it's just one of those things where, yes, I see where these parts of my faith structure and who I thought God wasn't based on his character, it was based on the character of men. And so it's like that sort of thing. It's like, yes, I have to deconstruct that. I have to strip that down to the studs to carry on in my faith, or it would be impossible to believe it at that point.
No, it's even worse than that, because people weaponize their perceived views of how you think God ought to be, and then they say, you believe this, what are you, nuts? And I want to ask, so what kind of God do you think I believe in? And you just, that's not the God I believe in. Well, you must not be a Christian. Yeah, I am, but you don't like my version of God. You've got your... And so atheists often accuse us with the wrong view of who God is, in my opinion. And so I want to ask, so what are you thinking? Especially when we're talking about outsiders who are asking questions of us. Now, inside, I think we still need to adjust that. Look, every time deconstruction takes place, there's almost always some pain going on. And Christians, we ought to be really tender with one another in those moments, because you're dealing with souls, and most of them, not all of them, some of them are just walking away, and I've had it, and for good reasons. But most of them are just looking for people to be kind. And I'm a little bit annoyed with, because tweets, and we alluded to one earlier, those kinds of postures are not tender. They're not kind. Is there something to be true and good and beautiful underneath that? And the answer is usually there is. We just have to help them get there.
And doubt does not equal shame.
Right.
Just because we use that word, it's okay to question. And I think God he can handle it.
Oh, big
you
time.
read the Bible and he's dealt with many worse things than me asking him the hard questions. And so I just think he can handle it. And then if we're around like people that are deconstructing, like my responsibility is not to shame you. And I can question and I can ask things. I think there's a freedom in it that we're still navigating. I feel like it's a little more, it's something that's talked about, I think, a little more openly, freely now, but there definitely is room for shame that does not need to be there. That doesn't need to be a part of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, shame's a
as we're
powerful
navigating.
motive. It's a powerful motive, and we need to be very careful about how you use shame. Is there a shame before God? Sometimes there is, and shame helps us to deal with sin. But with one another, we ought to be really careful with shame. That can just destroy people.
Yeah. One of the things I like to geek out of sometimes is to go look at Google Trends and just like the rise of, like, for example, if you go to Google Trends today, what's the name of the Supreme Court justice that? Breyer. So like Breyer's name all of a sudden is going to just fly up today because it's a news story. And so you can start to you can type in specific words and see like the search history from 2004 until now, and to kind of see, this term, this phrase started to popularize and people were searching for it more and more. And so I looked that up, just the words deconstruction and Christianity together, to just kind of see how people have been searching for that. And you do see, like, at 2019, this high slope to people searching for it, and just more, people wanting to be a part of that. And this, at least the popularity, the in vogueness, I'm not saying that like the coolness, but just in the popularity of the searches are just going up on Google across the web. And so what do you think some of the factors are that have led to a greater awareness, a greater permission, probably even in culture, to deconstruct over the last, few years in general? Because I think even the last couple of years, people have had more time by themselves. A lot. We've just been in a weird place the last couple of years. Yeah. So what are the things that you think have led towards that slope, that trending so fast in this topic?
I don't think it would be any surprise to start with some media connections. What aspect of your life are you exploring? You can find people out there who are exploring it with you. They may not be on your neighbor, they may not be on your phone list, but they're available and you can interact. And social media has created a world, whether it's Reddit or TikTok or whatever, the ability to find people who are also processing some of the same things you are. So you discover, I may be a little different, but I'm not that weird. There are a lot of me around somewhere, and I need to go find my tribe.
Yeah.
And of course, tribalism is one of our hot buttons in the world right
and
now.
I think to piggyback on that, your tribe typically geographically was in a spot contained by walking distance or driving distance or whatever. And as the internet has made the world smaller, you've kind of got this community, and with that comes this newfound confidence that probably wasn't available or afforded to people at another time. Because here maybe around this table we can agree on certain things, but if I disagree with you on something, I don't really have to face that confrontation too much, and I can even be flippant about it because I have the backing of my community online who agrees with me. Right. And you see this, I mean, we've talked about it before with the way that when was it last week when we were talking about spiritual abuse and different things where people are confronting family members or leaders and things like that about stuff, and when it comes to deconstruction or even walking away from the faith completely, I think there's this newfound confidence because they aren't maybe as fearful because there is a community out there waiting to embrace them, even if this one that they're involved in right now just falls away.
I think from a counseling side of things, it's interesting to look at this too, because there's an aspect of I'm asking the question, who am I? There's lots of acceptance, I think, in our culture today. And I think that allows, and I think there's even a more acceptance of mental health. So it allows us to kind of to process and look back. And as we unravel and we look at where have I come from? Who makes up Jess, or who makes up Eric, or who makes up these different aspects of who we are? There are some things, and even when I'm sitting in my office with somebody, it comes down to a spiritual aspect at some point. So I say, like, my parents have hurt me and influenced me, and that's who took me to church, or that's who, dropped me off at Sunday school but didn't go to church. And so now it's like asking the question, who is God to me? And I think there's a freedom when, people are going to counseling, or people are reaching out or finding those communities.
Yeah.
And I think it's allowed a freedom to explore more. But I think really it's like we're getting to that point of like, who am I? Like, who am I if it's just me and Jesus, and all of this is stripped away, or all this that's been put on me is stripped away? Like, what does this look like? And there's a freedom to peel back the onion and to sit in that uncertainty. And there's also like a courage and a braveness, I think, when people are doing this, that you see there's that connection of social media, or like you guys were saying, like other communities that are saying, yeah, do this. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of tread lightly because it's hard to go back and process, but I think that's also part of it. Mm-hmm.
We live in a world that has shifted from has moved through the postmodern world. And if we define modernism roughly as the ability to assess the world through our senses, and suggesting that there isn't much else to be had, the postmodern world has brought us to a position to say, there's no way that I can work with my five senses and come up with love and souls and heart. Mm-hmm. And so we're starting to be aware there's more complexity to humans than there were before. And in marketing, and I'm not a marketing specialist, but I realize that, and it's true about cultural paradigm shifts, and we're really into that. I think we saw cultural paradigm shift in the church in the last 15 years just with the gay and LGBTQ population broadly. Not because we've suddenly accepted everything, but we've become more curious and wanting to understand. Same thing goes on in deconstruction. What happens is that there's initially a little bit of information that goes out, and like pet rocks back in the 1970s, suddenly everybody had a pet rock. And everybody knew about it, and then it lost interest. But what seems to happen in a culture is we see a paradigm shift take place where we realize there's enough anomalies that I need to rethink this discussion. So the classic fundamentalists, those that are well assured of what they know, they're now realizing there's a whole bunch of people that are no longer just listening to them as authorities anymore. Media provides more authorities, obviously news, television, everything else that we have. Mm-hmm. And so there's a paradigm shift, a classic Kuhnian paradigm shift about the acceptance of spirituality and people's souls that matter. And we've always intuited it, but modernism really didn't give us too much room. Postmodernism does. And now we've kind of gone through the postmodern, and we're now trying to reconstruct. And suddenly people matter again, and now we're finding our tribes, and postmodern just identifies communities and say, how do we get together with people who know what we're like and want to resonate with us? I don't see that as automatically a negative thing. By the way, it allows Christians a possibility to get back to the table again, because we were kind of excluded from a lot of stuff for 100 years. So I'm not negative on where the culture has shifted, other than some of the destructive deconstruction that goes on, because the next step is, can we reconstruct? Mm-hmm. Terribly important for church to be able to step into that.
And I think probably one of the most obvious contributors is politics. I mean, we are in a place over the last couple of years, I think, especially in the American church, where, I mean, social media is a part of it, but I'm seeing literally people say that you cannot follow Jesus and vote this direction. And I've seen it from both directions, that you can't consciously follow Jesus and vote for this person or that person, because we've so, and there's a lot of factors to blame. Media has probably embedded the church with one side of a politics, and people in the church have also done that on both sides of the political spear, but it seems like there have been lines drawn more than ever in the sand that you have to belong to one or another, and if you belong to the opposite, then you're kind of kicked out. Then you have you have a weak faith that you don't care about either immigrants or you don't care about babies, and so we've so forced ourselves into those two camps that there leaves little room for nuance or curiosity or any of those kinds of things. And so I think Christians have become so dangerously hitched to politics that it seemed to make Jesus more repulsive towards those who have just seen Jesus through only a political lens. And so it becomes very difficult to be navigating that. Especially, college is traditionally, you worked at colleges for years, is traditionally one of those times where people deconstruct in some way or another. Even I went to a Bible college and I had to begin to deconstruct a lot of the things that I learned about theology and things like that. And so there's this healthy thing that I think a lot of parents are just, I hope my kid's ready to deconstruct.
Freaking out about it too. Well, in a lot of state schools, you have faculty who are there intentionally trying to undermine those of faith. And intentionally, which is why a lot of people are afraid to send their kids to state schools or to public schools or something like that. And there are some faculty. I find that to be rude now, especially in a postmodern world. Cut me a break. Just stop trying to undermine my faith. You teach your subject. I appreciate your subject, but you're not out here to try to determine to me or dictate to me whether I can have a spirituality in my life or something like that. So I think you're right about even in a Bible college, and maybe even more so in a Bible college, because now you see all the hypocrisy that often happens. And by hypocrisy, I don't mean failure to live up to our highest aspirations or something like that. I simply mean people who are deliberately misleading, which is maybe why we're dealing with politics right now, because at times we feel, whether it's about vaccines or diseases or politics or what happened on January 6th, we kind of wonder, do they really believe that? Are they just deliberately misleading? And I clue you, both ends, people are saying, I think they're deliberately lying to us to convince us that they're right. I think we need to be really, really careful here.
Well, it's like when you go into politics, we've just run into this homogenization of political leanings in Jesus, and that's become so detrimental to the testimony of our faith in so many different ways. And I think, Alex, I don't want to steal this as an original thought, but I think maybe it was with a conversation that we had off air where we were talking about how so many times, like even on the podcast, people will think, oh, you sound really, you're very liberal or you're very conservative or whatever because of the things we say. And it's like sometimes we were talking about how with family, when you're talking to, I think that was you who said that, like a lot of times when you're talking to family, you're a little more forward, a little more direct. And I think when we see other Christians behaving in a certain way, it's like so much easier to kind of point that out and bring that to the surface and go, hey, what are you doing? This isn't right, and then that tends to, what I think I've learned over the past couple of years is like the more you speak against something that people are for, you tend to just radicalize them in a way that is almost uncontrollable, and so that it's just all of that stuff starts to play into this factor of deconstruction where people are seeing others behave in ways, take on mannerisms and, different ways, talking in like other leaders and things like that, where it's like, okay, this isn't okay, especially if we're claiming to believe what this book tells us and to have a relationship with Christ. And it's messy and it's really tough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, having two girls that are probably older than you guys are, I've watched them have to walk. Maybe not. I don't know. But you go like my kids.
They're definitely not.
Maybe that. I guess you had one of them in high school, didn't you?
Yeah.
I realized that as they were going through Christian school, and they were in Christian school for a period of time, and some of the smugness of the approach to science and faith interface. One of my jobs was, as a parent at that point, was to prevent them from getting too angry at the world that's misleading them about whether it be creation, evolution, or vaccines, whatever it be. And I want them to be a little more thoughtful about that. So when they get into a real world and go to real college, in a real, whether it's Bible or college or Christian non-state college, I want them to be able to assess well and be able to bend with it and learn from it, not to crack and destroy. That's where deconstruction takes place. I mean, in a world where sex, money, power, that's right, Freud, Marx, and Nietzsche all running at us at the same time. Every one of those wants to move us off the mark here and move us off mission. And we're susceptible to those things, and those are the primary areas of accusation. I mean, how do we trust that you actually love? What does that even mean? It's all just power.
Yeah.
No, it's all just you're making money. And we are a consumerist Christianity. Good heavens. That's our DNA right now as a community. We're consumers. And so we're viewed as a marketing block. Yikes.
But to be clear, our DNA at Christ Community is not that we are consumers. We are contributors.
Thank you. And we are radically generous.
And we have to say that because we recognize that we've created that culture, not we at Christ Community, but in general, in Christendom, American Christendom, have created a consumer mentality. And we have to say it out loud to fight against it in some ways.
Yep. And it's good to say that and recognize it. We're not afraid of it. That's not what we want to be.
Yeah.
Do we fail? Once in a while. Yeah, but our aspiration is in that direction. Follow that aspiration.
One of the things you said earlier about the 6 pillars was, number 6, the church and how we act. And that's the one I feel like we've been dwelling on that a lot, but it just keeps, when we look at the reasons behind deconstruction, it just keeps going and going. I mean, I think another one is failed leaders in the church. We had a whole episode on the rise and fall of Mars Hill. And again, I mean, here, even in that podcast, you heard interviews with people who had gone through deconstruction or left the faith. Another reason is, these more earthly reasons where you're putting your faith in man.
Well, that particular series is powerful. I've been watching that one since back in the mid '90s because I was on the West Coast, and I literally had a friend of mine, a former student from the 1990s, who just posted he baptized his daughter in Arizona, that church. And I want to say, bless you. At
Trinity, where Driscoll is now?
Yeah. Yeah, didn't know whether to say the name of it or not, but I just thought, there's still stuff that's happening, but it still freaks me out. Yeah, it's why evangelicalism as a name is really problematic.
I think it's hard because
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
There's a lot of things that are presented. Like I'm sitting here listening to you all, and it's a lot of things. How people communicate them are black and white. Yeah. So to me, when you're communicating a black and white thing that I have questions about that I can't question, I'm pushed so far into a corner that deconstruction is the scariest and safest place for me to wrestle. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why it's it's alluring because it's like all the black and whites. I mean, you guys have said so many things in the past 4-5 minutes of this is how it's presented, and this is I mean, even in politics, you're not a Christian if you don't do this or that. So what's a Christian if that's your definition? Yeah. And so, I mean, we make it hard. We make it harder for ourselves too.
And I know there's a lot of people in Christendom that we just have to own the repulsive things that have been a part of church history. I mean, even in our there were Christians on the side of slavery, and we're using the Bible to justify it for oppression of women, for genocide, and this begins to when people are like, okay, morality, where's morality even in that? And it seems like we're justifying immoral things, and so we have to own some of those things. And there's been a lot of, books that have even been written on some of the origin myths that have happened in the U.S. and in our history and in how we were founded and the founding of those things that, start to make us wrestle a little bit with, okay, democracy and and what were they trying to actually preserve in some of those things. And sometimes we overlay our own Christian ideas and thoughts and framework and start to make a Plato Jesus out of those types of things. And so then, of course, then we become defensive. And I think ultimately where it gets scary is you said, I don't remember the word you used earlier, but I think very closely, there's a line between deconstruction and deconversion. And I would say conversion is, somebody putting their faith in Jesus and, having the opportunity, accepting the gospel and having the opportunity for life that is eternal. That's where we say life is found as Christians, right? And so you can get in all sorts of debates of can that ever be lost and stuff like that. Maybe that'll be another day. But I think there becomes this fear that someone may be questioning, doubting, curious, that they're not going to be all of a sudden found in heaven. And that, when you start to talk about that, as a parent, that's scary. And so you start to write your own story, your own narrative of, oh man, this one question can lead to, my kid maybe not having actual real life, living in all eternity with me. And so that can become a scary thought for people.
Well, and you're realizing you're dealing with eternal verities, eternal truths, and to undermine some of those things freaks a parent out. And that's why I think raising a child to be able to handle that kind of discussion early, I don't think you can start that too early. It's not to make the comparison pointed, but I think even sexuality, I don't think boys are boys at the moment they're born. Now, you don't have to be descriptive about everything, but they're male. And I realize the LGBTQ discussions here. I'm well aware of that. But I mean, but they're whatever they are at the moment of birth, and they're going to continue to be that way. So why try to oversimplify this as this is what you're supposed to be like? Give them a shot. Every conversion, to your point, is a deconversion off of something. And so I actually think you go through a lot of different kinds of conversion. Now, ultimately, the conversion to Christ, that is to place my eternal trust in what the act that God did on the cross and the resurrection. That's a kind of conversion, but it's also we just turned away from something else, and sometimes we just turn away from wrong views of things, and so we're in a constant mode. Deconstruction and conversion are intimately intertwined, and deconversion, conversion, they're intimately. My other word is destructive, not just deconstruction, but destruction. That's the concern I have, not deconstruction. But it's what it does. It's not an end in of itself, which is where a lot of, and this is the problem of deconstruction, at least in Derrida's mind. Is there ever an end to this thing? And the answer is there should be an end, but we don't seem to know where to find it, so we're constantly critiquing. Stop it. Get off. This is a pre-modern enterprise. It's not a postmodern enterprise. We get a chance to look at the history of the church. And I want to say none of the questions that are coming up now are all that new. Yeah. Not really. Peace and war were being debated early on in the church. By the way, the earliest church was pretty much pacifistic. You had to wait until you got to the time of Constantine when suddenly you had an empire, and then you got to, war has to take place. We better go figure out how war fits in here. You can track these things historically quite well. Not hard. No, we're just in a long trip here that looks familiar, just new garb.
A big part of this is the term ex-evangelical that was trending a lot over the past couple of years as people made this choice to deconstruct, and it kind of became synonymous with the term deconstruction. But I think in some ways you kind of have to know what the word evangelical is and what it means to know what an ex-evangelical is. Where when you just look up the basic definition of evangelical, it's relating to or being in agreement with the Christian gospel, especially as it is presented in the four gospels. So I think a lot of people would go, okay, well, yeah, I'm that, I guess. Like if I believe in that, I'm evangelical, but the word has taken on a new meaning in today's culture. Even when you hear it on the news and they're saying so and so rates high with evangelicals, and then it's like, well, who are you talking about necessarily? Are you talking about actual evangelicals or people who fit into that mold of demographic.
I hate to say we're bucking up against the no true Scotsman type of discussion about that point. He's obviously not a really an evangelical, doesn't buy this. Theologically, we've spent a lot of time defining it historically. Usually something around the Bible and the cross and mission and those kind of Jesus and needing to be personally converted. But I've also in class I might mention something about the trans-denominationalism. That is that it can actually reach across a lot of different aisles. But right now there's a lot of sociology around that. So identifying what an evangelical is, it's true. So how do you have an ex-evangelical? There are people who have moved to Anglican communions that are actually quite conservative and don't want to identify with evangelicalism anymore.
Yeah.
So you can have ex-evangelicals in a lot of communities, and just as you can have atheistic ex-evangelicals who have just I was one, but no, I ain't that. Depends on what your picture was to begin with that you're rejecting.
Yeah.
And there's people that, Phil Vischer we had on this conversation, him and Sky, Chitani and the Holy Post, they talk a lot about that word evangelical, because even so, like, to the definition of evangelical, there's also this whole cultural meaning that evangelical equals Christian, and they've like said, hey, maybe we should leave that. Russell Moore, there's a whole litany of people that have said, hey, maybe we'll separate ourselves from that word evangelical because it comes with a lot of baggage. And evangelical is just another word that was separated from something else that had a lot of baggage. Jesus he called his people disciples. He didn't even call them Christians. That was the label that was given by the cultural, people at the time. And so what they were calling was little Christs. And so I think there's even people that I would say have a pretty good theology of what the gospel is, and that's pretty sound and conservative, that are even beginning to question that term or how much they want to be associated with the term. And it's not even about the definition of the term, but it's about how it's hijacked. The definition's been hijacked, and they don't want to be associated with all the people, that, especially I think in the last couple of political cycles.
It's especially an American problem, though. You won't find that in Canada. You don't find it in Australia, in England, most of the English-speaking world, most of the non-English-speaking world, which is pretty much everybody else, I guess. You don't find that kind of division. And to walk into, and I'm going to say this with all due respect, to being as someone like an Aussie, to come to the United States and walk into a church and have a flag on stage would just be appalling. It doesn't compute because they're not used to that association. So the problem becomes, is there a better word? And it feels like the term has been co-opted out of our hands and now being defined by pollsters, sometimes who know what they're doing. I think Gallup sometimes knows what he's doing, but other times you just don't know. Honestly, you just don't know how they define it. So there's it's a big word. And so what an ex-evangelical is based on what an evangelical is, I think we're all guessing. It gets really messy. And do we want to reclaim the term? Is it worth reclaiming? I believe the evangel is at the heart of what we believe.
Yeah.
So I'm hard-pressed to find a better one. I just am very uncomfortable with it. So I spend all my time being a caveat distributor on those things.
Yeah. That's why people's Twitter bios always say Christ follower.
Yeah. I think I did the same thing with Facebook about 15 years ago.
Yeah.
I didn't realize at that time this is going to be popular.
I just say I'm a disciple of Christ.
An apprentice of Jesus. I think that was the way Dallas Willard would call it.
Are there any brief examples of deconstruction in our own lives that we'd be willing to share? Or maybe if people are still kind of wrestling with what this looks like, or what, if I deconstruct, am I still a Christian? Am I not a Christian? Like, is there any examples come to mind?
I think like going off of when we talked about spiritual abuse last week, like for me, just in my past, there was a lot of theology, a lot of things that were put on me that I didn't get to choose. I just it was kind of like putting on layers, like as you put on your shirt, jacket, like all these layers I was carrying around. And I feel like I got to a point in my life, it was college, where it was kind of like, what am I carrying? Like, what's on me? Because people are seeing this and I'm representing something. What does that mean? And it was kind of, I don't know. I feel like I had to come to a place in my life where it was just like a safe place to land and kind of explore and ask questions. And I think that that's like important it was important for me. I don't want to put that on somebody else, but it was important for me to have a safe place and people I trusted to figure out who I trusted, to kind of take that off, to take those layers off. And like I said before, like, who is it when it's just me and Jesus? And I can ask him, like, why did this happen? Why did this get put on me? And then getting to choose, like, what I put back on. And some of it was the same things. Some of it was different. But it was like, it was my choice, but it was also personal. And it also made that relationship with the Lord so much sweeter for me. But it was in the wrestling and the freedom of, you can doubt, you can ask why. And professors like, Karl and I have been knowing each other for a while. But I think like also, it's not, maybe deconstruction is a new term, but there's still people that, whether the term was there or not before, back when I was in school, there were still safe places and there were still people that maybe that wasn't the definition at the time of what I was doing, but it was like, hey, you're questioning and you're making this faith your own. Like, you can ask me questions. And so kind of my journey. And I feel like it's, when I think of deconstruction now, it's not, maybe it's something that you do once in your life, but sometimes it's like maintenance. It's like going back and saying like, hey, I took this on about 10, 12 years ago, and I can go back and I can relook at it. It's just like this podcast, like kind of redoing it again. And like, hey, that happened 2 years ago. Like, you can kind of maintain it and you can kind of like start working on it again. And I think there's some freedom.
If I do a DNA test on you, you're the same person, but you're not the same person. You will be lots of different people in your life by the time you're done, and hopefully there's a continuity to it and a reasonableness to it. But if you don't change, something is not working right. That's the one thing you can be pretty sure. You're going to continue to change. And you should change your mind once in a while. And working with college students, the one thing I wanted to have in a classroom was to say, okay, the door is shut. There's no mics. There is such a thing as heresy. Heresy has a wonderful history that's not very good. Ask questions, and we'll try not to. All right, if you want to know what time it is, look at your watch, for crying out loud. But not be afraid to ask questions and genuinely ask questions. Not be afraid of saying you're a heretic because you raised it up. And I occasionally get some pretty bizarre questions. Yeah, that's probably heretical. But let's walk you back. And I'll try not to say that to you, but let's walk it back a little bit.
How about you guys?
Yeah, I'm a little leery to say I have deconstructed more for like, I don't want someone that's listening to this that has had a legitimate pain points and spiritual abuse and trauma and things that have led them to deconstruct what they were raised in, because I just don't know that, and I don't want someone to say, I have, because I don't want, like, I wouldn't say left the faith. I've been challenged, and I would say my faith looks different, but the Nicene Creed, all those things, I haven't deconstructed all of that. I've actually become more in my questioning convinced of those things. And so I don't want to just be dismissive by saying, yeah, of course, everybody's deconstructed, because I don't want that person to feel like, yeah, of course you're just saying that. But at the same time, in the same breath, I do think it is a more prevalent thing that is happening in all of our lives than we realize, especially that's why I wanted to have like a definition, that I was coming across, because I've pulled apart the belief system I was raised in to determine what is still believable in the light of everything else I know. And there's things I have shed. There are things that everything else I know, because of my understanding of whether it's language, or my understanding of how the canon was put together, my understanding of cultural context, that I've shed some of those types of things, and that's good. Yeah. So I've definitely deconstructed in that, and hey, there's ways I'm raising my family that are different, but also being able to hopefully have the maturity to say, and just because I think it's different, and doesn't mean that my parents, with the information that they had and their lives that weren't raised in the church, were just fools and just dumb and all of that kind of stuff. And so being able to have the maturity to say, well, I've had a different life experience, And so that's where just having that, have I deconstructed? Yes. But have I deconstructed the same way as everybody else, or how you're going to maybe define it?
Yeah.
No.
Right.
But I think, go
Do
ahead.
you think in another 15 or 20 years, your kids will be going through some of the same things, and they will look at you and you wonder, what was I hanging on to so tightly for that didn't need to be?
Oh, I would guess so for sure.
Kind of wonder
Yeah.
what those things will be, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
Well, and I think it is important for us to define that, what it looks like in different people's lives, because I think when they hear the term, and I think even speaking to our episode 2 years ago, I think there was a guard that kind of went up, like, oh, this means you're leaving the faith. Hands down, that's what this means. So I think when you hear that term, it's good to know that it can take different forms in a person's
Right.
life than just, denouncing their faith. Because I know even for me, it was always family, right? I grew up in the church. I would look to my older siblings or to my dad, who was the pastor, and I'd always react based on their reactions to things in the world and around us, and that was kind of my worldview. It's like, oh, is this good or is this bad? And you start to strip those things away, and you realize that, okay, this Bible that I'm claiming I believe in is not showing me that I'm the main character, right? Like or my family isn't the main character, or the people that I love aren't the main characters. Like it's about God and Him redeeming the messiness around us. And I think sometimes I had to just sit with that a lot of times, because I think we're so self-centered about everything that we do in our day-to-day lives, that when you realize that, I mean, that in itself for me was a big form of, or at least what could fit into this definition of deconstruction.
That's good.
All right, we need to wrap things up, but is there any, I mean, hopefully our goal in this comes across that, one, we want to maybe right some of the wrongs that, we made in the beginning with this, the first time we took a stab at this topic. The other side of it is we know there are a lot of people dealing with these things, a lot of people maybe even in their quiet place right now, they haven't even spoken a thought of it to other people. They're maybe listening and struggling with this and wondering, what the next step is for them. Is there any advice we can give to people listening who are maybe on the journey of deconstruction or thinking about it, or maybe they've been hurt and they feel like this is their only option? What advice can we leave them with?
Gosh, there's a boatload, but let me speak as an older person for a minute. I have to be really careful to recognize the 30-year-old me is the same me, but I'm different, and I need to be very forgiving of the fact that I was like I was 35 years ago.
Yeah.
As a human being who had certain definitive ideas, and a lot of them have changed. They haven't radically changed. I haven't had to literally move a new foundation. But I need to be able to go back to at what I was before and say it was good to be where I was at the time. And God has on journey. Now, some journeys are relatively smooth and go through some. I went through puberty. I want to say, was I a nasty kid? Yeah, at times. But it wasn't like I grew 3 feet and 200 pounds in 6 months type of change. It was pretty gradual. So other people are very different than that. So I think the same thing happens with deconstruction. I've been through multiple shifts and adjustments. Welcome them. And maybe the better thing to do is say, don't be afraid of them, because I think we believe that there is actually truth underneath it that you can find. There's a foundation, and I want to say it's Jesus as opposed to a few other things like the church. And while the only way we can get to Jesus is through Scripture at one level, and the Spirit at another level, I don't want to say that the Bible is not part of the Trinity. I mean, it's critical to it, but it's not part of the Trinity. At the end of the day, the one that matters is going to be Jesus. And I want to focus, even through the transformation of changes that we go back. I don't see many people going and say, Jesus was a dork. That even sounds blasphemous to say. Mm-hmm. Nobody in there, and even non-believers. I mean, even Nietzsche wandered around trying to do it, and he couldn't. Because he found a scintillating personality. That's where you ground yourself. And we can fuss about texts and stuff like that all day long. And we should. I mean, we really should. But at the end of the day, so I'm, at one level, welcome the change. Don't be afraid of them. They will happen the rest of your life. And I'll get to be 85 and 90, I hope. I hope, but I hope there's still change going on. I want there to be life, and I want there to, and I want to get to the bottom of it and say I can still walk with Jesus. This was the thing about Irving Malm. At 99 years old, he still wants to walk with Jesus. Yep, he knew there were a bunch of other things going on, but that's what mattered. That's too simple, but you get the point.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah,
Anything
I think for someone that is going through it, man, that'd be my advice too, is look at Jesus, man, don't look at me, because I'll miss the mark. And I'm hopefully trying to become more like Jesus. But ultimately that's the place, that's the crux, the life, death, resurrection of Jesus is the place to your true north. And I've failed at that many a times. But I also think the other question is for somebody walking through, like if you know somebody walking through it, I think, some of my advice would be, man, people are not problems to be solved. They're wonders to behold. I remember a guy named Marco, who's a youth pastor, first middle school pastor ever at CCC, but I was at a conference and he just kept talking about that middle schoolers are not problems to be solved, but wonders to behold. And when we approach people as wonders to behold and not always assume the worst or that, I think that's so critical and discovering that wonder and not just, I have to solve this problem. And I think mostly too that the conversations I've had with people that are deconstructing or wrestling with their faith, doubting, walking away, most of them aren't intellectual, so I think giving some apologetics has its place. It's good. But for the most part, that's not like the first thing to hand someone and an apologetics book to try to convince them intellectually of all this stuff. There's other things that are deeper in the surface, and maybe you've contributed. I'm sorry, can go a long way. But walking with somebody in that, and people need community. They're somebody that's walking through deconstruction. They're taking risk. They are walking away from everything that they've known. There's a cost for them that's involved, and there's fear behind that cost, and fear of what you're going to think about, especially if you're a family member, fear that you'll cut off a relationship. Man, if that fear is a part of them, and you probably contributed to that fear in some way, and you need to, man, be a listener to that type of person, because, and man, let the fruit of the Spirit be evident in your life. Live a life that has unshakable joy, unshakable hope, and continue to ask that the Spirit is making that evident in your life, that there's something attractive about the way you're living that's rooted in your faith. And so those are the thoughts that come to my mind when having those. Like last night I was at a basketball practice, and it's a Christian league, and third grade boy, we're talking about creation and sin, and third grade boy is like, so why was the tree? Why did God put the tree in the garden? And so the other coach was doing the Devo, and I didn't. And I was like, that's a great question to ask your mom. And I'm like, hopefully his mom had a good question. But then my son immediately in the car is like, so Dad, why was the tree there? And I'm not going to answer the question right now. But we had a good conversation about that, and it wasn't just because because the Bible said so. Like it just cannot be. You have to have nuanced conversations, and so people are asking those tough questions, and we can't just simply say, "Go have some faith, Jimmy."
I think when somebody asks about deconstruction, I just think take a deep breath. Because sometimes it feels like when someone's deconstructing their faith, it feels like an attack on yours. And that's not what it's about. You're in the presence of vulnerability and questioning and somebody figuring out faith for them. And so I think saying things like, help me understand, tell me more about that, sitting, being a listener, and holding back those knee-jerk reactions goes a long way, because somebody's trusting you with something, whether it's a family member or whoever, and that might be the last conversation you have with them if you, like we talked about earlier, put on shame. I think it's a precious place that we hold people even even if they are defensive and leading with anger, like there's something behind that. And I think us having the humility to look at that person and to not be defensive, and the insight of saying like, let me walk with you. Like, let's take a walk around the block instead of, pushing somebody across the street and slamming the door.
Yeah. It's really good.
Right on.
All right. Well, hopefully we did an incrementally better job this time than last time, but if not, I'm sure we'll hear about it in the comments. So
We'll hear about it. We'll talk about it in 2.5 years again now. So.
yeah.
I'm going to retire by then.
I was going to say, if people want to actually know the answer to the question about why the tree was in the garden, Origins started in February.
Oh, yeah.
Be here for the new series.
Wow. Segue.
Yeah, just, a corporate shield here for the company.
Or if you're listening to this 2.5 years from now, then look back on the YouTube channel. We'll be there.
Find that new message series coming soon. All right. We've taken up enough of your time today. Thank you, Karl, for being here. Always appreciate it. It's always a pleasure to have you on. Jess, Alex, thank you as well. Even though you're here always, I still appreciate it. And thanks to everyone who's listening. We really do appreciate it. We wouldn't be doing this if there weren't at least somebody out there listening. So we really appreciate that.
Maybe we would.
Yeah. Maybe. We might do it and just do it for ourselves. If you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can do that on social media at CCC Omaha, or you can send an email directly to this podcast. That email address is podcast@cccomaha.org. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, we'll talk to you then.